Hey, good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Before I begin what I actually prepared, and I will, I just wanted to share a couple thoughts of maybe what you're feeling also from this past week. I like to daven. I like to daven in services, but I think last Saturday afternoon may be the most I've ever davened. Most I've ever prayed with that kind of intensity in a while, because I had heard what Iran was doing. And when you hear the phrase, drones are in the air, heading toward the people you love, my kishkis, they weren't even my kishkis were on the ceiling. And I'm grateful that Israel was prepared and that America and England and France and even Jordan joined in on this and started feeling a little bit better. And then the other night, I'm about to go to bed, and for some reason I decided, well, let's just look at the news one more time. Oh, Israel just sent rockets in Iran. And I'm thinking, this is all either going to be fine or it's going to be Armageddon. Right? I didn't see any in between on this. And so I don't know about you, my emotions have been all over the place. If you don't have family in Israel, someone you love has family there. And it has been a lot. And I think a lot of us are drained. A lot of us are uncertain. We're relieved right now, but it's been a lot. And things I think we took for granted about how the world works doesn't feel true anymore. But what's beautiful about our people is we have found a way to go on anyway. Every people on earth has suffered somehow. Every people on earth has somehow experienced war. But I think what's powerful about us is how we react to it, how we find a way to pull together, that we find a way to get through it. And that's ultimately what Passover is. There were a lot of other people enslaved by the Egyptians. A lot of other people suffered, but we came out. And we came out because we had courage, and we came out because we had hope, and we came out because we had faith, even though everything was so incredibly difficult. We are going to come through this too. I know there are days it doesn't feel like it, but we have 3,000 years of evidence that we get through things. And it is not going to stop here. So I just wanted to share that this has been on my mind. I know how much it's been on yours as well. And what I prepared actually does kind of go along with this, but I felt that I couldn't just get up here and pretend nothing had happened. But there is a power that wants to fight evil. And we represent that power, and when I saw even Jordan and other countries saying this is too far, it gave me some hope. I know Jordan did it out of self-interest, but I'm glad their self-interest aligned with ours. I'm under no illusions. I don't think that the king of Jordan sent Netanyahu a box of like those chocolate-colored raspberry rings for Passover. Like, hey, Bibi, I bet you like these. I'm under no illusion. But at some point, standing up for the right thing causes other people to stand up for the right thing. So don't get tired of standing up for the right thing, even when you're exhausted. So let me now share what I actually did prepare, but I think there is. Well, today's Shabbat HaGadol. It doesn't mean the great Shabbat, it is the Shabbat of the capacity for greatness. And that's what we remind ourselves of before Passover. So I want to talk about Yitzhak Perlman, who is really one of the greatest and most beloved musicians and teachers of our time. And as you probably know, he's in a wheelchair. He was able to use braces for a while, but when he plays, he goes on stage and he sits on the stage, and he removes his braces and he gets himself into a certain position where he's comfortable. And you're probably familiar with probably the most famous story about his playing, that he was playing a very complex piece, and the string snapped. Well, there are 4 strings on a violin, and one of them broke. And he didn't want to put the braces on, go back off stage, restring the violin, retune it, come back. What he was able to do is just recalibrate, and instead of the notes he would have played on one string, he played on the others. Now, it's very, very impressive that he was able to do that. But he's not the only one who would have been able to do that. What was powerful about him is that he could do it and still sound like himself. It was a moment of pressure and crisis, but he was still able to keep playing and sound like Yitzhak Perlman. So he had this tremendous sense of being able to adapt. And a lot of it, though, it comes from his childhood. And Perlman was born in Israel in 1945. And he contracted polio in 1949 when he was 4 years old. There was a terrible polio epidemic, and it swept through the Middle East as well, and he contracted it at the age of 4. And so his parents took him to a Kabbalist to heal him. They were a mystic healer. And it worked about as well as you may have expected. But the reason they took him is that in Israel, the first hospital to treat polio patients wasn't built until July of 1954. Right, when it was too late for him to make an enormous difference. So what I want to flag here, though, is that as weird as it sounds that his parents took him to a Kabbalist in 1949 for polio, they were doing the best they could at the time. Right? The hospital to treat polio was not developed until he was 9 years old, a full 5 years later. So his parents, if that hospital had been there, that's where they would have taken him. But they did the best they could with what they could do, with what they had, and with the information that they had. And I think that this is really a theme throughout the Jewish people, is we do the best we can with what we have and what we know. And this actually comes from our Torah portion this morning, which is Metzora, which on the surface sounds kind of strange. You have a ritual that you do with someone who contracts Metzora, which is a certain kind of skin disease. It says, Zot tihiyah Torat HaMetzora biyom taharato v'huva el hakohen, that this person, this is the ritual that you do for the person who has tzara'at, this kind of skin disease, and you go to the Kohen, and the Kohen looks it over, and it says, V'tziva haKohen v'lakach limitaher shtei tziporim chayot tahorot ve'etz erzu Shnei Tolav Ezov. The priest will take 2 live birds, cedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop, and they go through this entire ritual with the bird. And I'm not going to go into all of it. Ironically, we do have vegan kiddush today as part of our grant. You do not have to show your vegan ID card in order to get served, but we're not going to talk about what happens to the bird. That's all I'm saying. But this was considered to be the cure for this particular disease, and it sounds very strange, but that's what they had. That's what they understood in the world, and they did absolutely the best they could. And later on, as there were advances in other kinds of medicine, they stopped that ritual with the bird, and they used the other kinds of medicines. They adapted to the situation. And I think that this is something that, as Jews, we have always done, and I think this is an important thing to think about, is we honor the past, we remember the past, we're inspired by the past, but we do not live in the past. If we lived just by what the Torah says, it would have been a very different world. For example, in the Torah, when you buy and sell something, you have to take physical possession of it. Like, you have to be able to take the object itself, hold it up, sell it to the person who takes that object. What if the person you want to sell it to lives in another country and not just in the village? The Jews would have been out of business if we couldn't do business. Right? The Torah is very clear. Even if you're selling an animal, you have to have physical possession of the animal, whatever the item is. But as international trade began to flourish, we adapted. We said, we can't do this anymore. We'll keep reading the story in the Torah. We're not crossing it out. But in order to live and survive, things have to be different. The way marriage and divorce is handled, I'm not going to go into the details all this because we'll be here until Passover. But the mechanisms that were developed during the time of the Talmud are much, much more balanced in terms of fairness to these spouses. In the Torah, it's very much just one direction. One spouse has all the power in marriage and divorce, and there's a shift, and there's a shift over time. What end of life means is different because of medical technology. What beginning of life means is different because of medical technology. And there's even been adaptations. How many of you think plastic surgery for cosmetic purposes is permitted in even the strictest of Jewish law? It is. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the great scholars of Jewish law of the 20th century, one of the great scholars, period, he said that cosmetic surgery that can be done without significant risk to the patient, but would elevate their self-esteem and help them feel like they really fit in, was absolutely permitted. He said that there are people who are, we want everyone to feel good about who they are and how they look now, but he also understood there are people that was never going to happen. And he said that plastic surgery, if it helps someone feel better about themselves and function better, would be permitted. This was a tremendous change and a tremendous adaptation, but it came from plastic surgery becoming safer and safer. So there was that change, there was that adaptation. And there are lots of other examples that I could give, but what every generation of our people has done is say, what does our tradition say, but what is our reality now? What is our capacity? Because there are a number of people who say you can only do things the way they did them in the past. Even Passover, you know, when people hear that it's permissible to eat rice and legumes, and by the way, they are really tasty. They are really, Sephardic Jews have always eaten them. Ashkenazic Jews ate all of it until the Middle Ages, until we said to ourselves, we are not allowed to enjoy ourselves anymore. Right? It's the Ashkenazi who banned the rice and lentils because there's a lot going on psychologically. I call it the Ashkenazic fear of happiness, which is a thing. But a lot of the reasons that people won't eat the kidney out, the rice and lentils and beans, is because people and some of their ancestors in the past wouldn't do it. Which might, I mean, I get that. But the question is really, are we honoring the past or are we living in the past? Do we say this is what our ancestors do and this is what we do now? And the scary part, change is very scary. And in times of instability, nobody wants more change. And I get that. There's going to be a lot of comfort food at the Seder this year. Right? People who in other years may have tried very kind of exotic recipes and I don't know, blackened gefilte fish or whatever weird thing Wolfgang Puck tried to come up with. This year, I think it's just going to be like straight comfort food, whatever that is. But what I do really want us to think about is that one of the keys to the Jewish people surviving where we are is not because we emulated the past. It's because we learned from the past. We honor it again, but we don't live in it. And our descendants, they're going to do things differently also. They are not going to, it's going to be a weird thing to think about. We are the past for the future generations. You go into a house, you see those old black and white pictures, and no one really knows, that's Uncle Mo, but who's that guy? That's us. Sometime in the future, which is okay. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way, I think that's really the way that it should be. We are living in a time that is really scary. We are living in a time of uncertainty, but the world has always been scary and uncertain. What I am certain about, though, is that we can get through this. We can learn from the story of leaving Egypt and make that story our own. We can find a way to do this. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be nervous. But we're going to make it through anyway. We have always done the best with what we have. We've always done the best with what we know. And that's really always been good enough. Shabbat Shalom.